The very next day, Grandma Sultana made a bold move. She began to tease Faireyes, letting her delicate hands wander over his chest and crotch, calling him dashing and irresistible. At first, Faireyes resisted, but she confidently brushed it off, saying she'd pay whatever he wanted if he could satisfy her. That was music to his ears. Exactly what he'd been hoping for. Faireyes had done this kind of thing before, and when the client wasn't particularly attractive, they had to pay. Hi there, and welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving back into the chilling real-life events that happen around the world. This time, we're taking you to Dhaka, Bangladesh, for a story that's as fascinating as it is horrifying. As we all know, times are changing fast. So fast, it feels impossible to keep up. One area where we've seen massive changes is transportation. Online motorcycle taxis have exploded in popularity and become a primary source of income for many people. Bangladesh is no exception, and this mode of transportation has given rise to some truly unique and unexpected stories. Which brings us to today's case. What really happened? Stick around as we unpack every twist and turn of this gripping tale. Let's dive in. Before we jump into the story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with your friends, because trust me, you're going to want to talk about this one. So, here's the deal. There was a young man named Faireyes from Srinagar. He moved to Dhaka at 26 back in 2016, and over the years, he worked all sorts of jobs: cleaning service, clothing shop assistant, and most recently, bartender at a nightclub. It was in these nightlife circles that Faireyes met plenty of glamorous women, many of whom were just looking for a drink or someone to talk to so they could escape their problems for a while. Some of these women found Faireyes, let's say, interesting. If they were attractive and not too much trouble, Faireyes might indulge them for free. But if someone wasn't quite his type or had some weird requests, they'd better be ready to pay top dollar. No hard feelings. If you didn't like his rates, you could simply walk away. Easy, right? Life was good for Faireyes. Between his flashy nightlife and the money rolling in, everything seemed set, until the pandemic hit. When nightclubs shut down to follow health protocols, his income dried up. At first, Faireyes thought he could manage with his savings, figuring the lockdown would only last a month or two. But when a couple of months turned into over a year, things got rough. He ended up deep in debt with no clear way out. That's when a friend suggested he sign up as a driver for a popular online taxi and delivery app in Dhaka. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. He ferried passengers, delivered packages, and picked up food orders. True to his playboy nature though, Faireyes didn't let go of his flair. He always showed up looking sharp, smelling great, and riding a well-kept motorcycle. It was part of his charm. And it worked. Fast forward to March 2021, when parts of Dhaka were still under lockdown. One day, Faireyes delivered a food order to a woman in the Malabag area named Farhana. As it turned out, they'd met before during his nightclub days. They struck up a conversation, exchanged numbers, and caught up on life. Faireyes opened up about his struggles, how tough it had been to survive as an online driver. Farhana, always optimistic, encouraged him to adapt and stay strong, reminding him that life is all about resilience. Farhana herself had been hit hard by the pandemic. She owned a shop selling branded bags and shoes, but like many businesses, it had to close temporarily. She and her 3 employees pivoted to selling on social media to keep things afloat. At 42, Farhana was now living with her new husband Mahmood, who was 6 years younger but also struggling with unemployment during the pandemic. After their food delivery encounter, it was Farhana who kept reaching out to Faireyes. She'd text to check in on him or invite him over, especially when she was cooking something special and her husband, Mahmood, was away visiting his parents. Naturally, Faireyes was more than happy to oblige, partly because he enjoyed the food, but mostly because he had his sights set on Farhana and her wealth. Faireyes wasn't concerned about Mahmood. In his eyes, Mahmood was just another man chasing after Farhana's money. As it turned out, Farhana and Faireyes ended up getting intimate, and not just once. Twice, Mahmood walked in and caught them red-handed. But instead of putting an end to it, Mahmoud did nothing. He was too scared of being divorced and thrown out, left with nothing but his poverty. So, he chose to look the other way. Things escalated in April. Mahmoud and a few of his friends ambushed Fariz on the street and gave him a brutal beating. They warned him to stay away from Farhana and keep his mouth shut, or else. Initially, Fariz considered reporting the assault, but then Mahmoud sent a chilling message. He knew Fariz's parents' address in Srinagar. If Fariz dared to see Farhana again, his family would pay the price. Fearing for his parents' safety, Fariz had no choice but to back off. Fast forward to October 2021. Fariz, now focusing on his job as an online food delivery driver, got an order to a quiet residential complex in Dhaka's Kilgaon area. The neighborhood was peaceful, almost serene, and the customer was a 70-year-old woman named Sultana. She lived alone but told Fariz about her 7 children, who lived in other cities but sent her generous monthly allowances. On top of that, she still received her late husband's pension from his job as a land official. During their chat, Sultana made Fariz an offer. If he could deliver food to her daily, skipping the app altogether, she'd pay him directly and cover his transportation costs. Fariz agreed without hesitation. Helping out a sweet grandmother with 12 grandchildren sounded easy enough. But the next day, things took an unexpected turn. Sultana began flirting with Fariz, letting her hands wander to places they probably shouldn't. At first, Fariz resisted, but she confidently upped the ante, saying she'd pay him whatever he wanted, as long as he could satisfy her. That was all the motivation Fariz needed. After all, he'd done this kind of thing before with less attractive clients who were willing to pay for his time. Within a month, Fariz became a regular at Sultana's house. He'd satisfied her 8 times, charging her around $70 per visit. Meanwhile, Sultana kept up appearances with her kids, telling them the money was for health checkups. On December 4, 2021, Fariz got an online food delivery order for the same housing complex he'd been frequenting. This time, the delivery was to the first floor, for a customer named Mrs. Tasni. At 46 years old, Tasni enjoyed jogging, had a 16-year-old son, and her husband worked in the office chair manufacturing business. When she saw Fariz, she paused for a moment, clearly intrigued. She asked if he lived in the building or if someone he knew did because she often noticed him going up to the second floor. Fariz smiled and explained that he frequently delivered food to Grandma Sultana on the second floor. "She's a sweet lady," he added, "and we've grown close, like family." Tasni raised an eyebrow and smirked, saying, "Well, I'd like to be family too." She'd heard rumors about Sultana, how she had a reputation for being flirtatious and always dressed provocatively. It was clear Tasni was now infatuated with Fariz, curious about the young man who'd charmed the infamous grandma. Boldly, Tasni asked for Fariz's phone number, saying it would be handy if she ever needed someone to grab food or go for a walk. Fariz handed it over without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, whenever her husband and son were out, she invited Fariz over. Sometimes they'd just chat, maybe share a meal, but it was clear there was more happening. Her rates, however, were cheaper than Grandma Sultana's. Not only that, but Tasni started spoiling Fariz, buying him expensive clothes, shoes, and jackets online and having them shipped directly to his boarding house. Though Fariz initially felt awkward accepting the gifts, he later began asking for cash more often, claiming he needed it for rent or to repair his motorcycle. It wasn't just Tasni. Sultana, ever smitten, couldn't resist helping Fariz either. Every time he lamented about his father being seriously ill and needing money for treatment, she'd quickly hand him cash. In her mind, as long as Fariz loved her wholeheartedly, nothing else mattered. Their relationship deepened, and Sultana became bolder, fully giving herself to the young man she adored. But everything changed on the afternoon of January 3, 2022. After attending a church service, Sultana was heading up to her second-floor apartment when she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. Fariz was stepping out of Tasni's first-floor apartment, smiling and holding hands with her. Sultana's heart shattered. Jealousy surged through her, sharp and painful. As far as she knew, Fariz didn't have any relatives in Dhaka, Certainly not in this building. How could he walk out of another woman's home, looking so happy? How could he betray her like this? Unable to contain herself, Sultana marched up to him, furious. She lashed out, accusing Tasni of seducing Ferais. She even threatened to report Tasni to her husband for bringing a strange man into their home. Ferais, panicked, tried to calm her down, worried about the growing attention from nosy neighbors peeking through their windows. It was too late. A few residents had gathered at Tasni's door, curious about the commotion. Without a word, Tasni retreated into her apartment and locked the door behind her, leaving Sultana fuming and Ferais scrambling to defuse the situation. Afterward, Ferais took Sultana back upstairs to her apartment, trying to smooth things over. He told her he'd only gone to Tasni's place to drop off a heavy package. But Sultana wasn't buying it. "And what about the hand-holding?" she asked, her voice sharp. Ferais, quick on his feet, lied again. "I wasn't holding her hand," he said. "I was slipping her a tip for being so polite. Please, don't be so possessive." Reluctantly, Sultana let it slide. Deep down, she didn't want to risk losing him. For all her doubts, the thought of breaking up with Ferais hurt too much. But things took a dramatic turn a few days later. On the evening of January 9, 2022, Tasni's husband, Rashid, got a shocking report from their teenage son. The boy, usually quiet and reserved, claimed he'd caught his mom making out with a handsome motorcycle delivery driver while his dad was away. Rashid trusted his son and couldn't ignore the accusation. What's more, he'd heard rumors from neighbors about Sultana dating a young delivery driver, someone Rashid himself had seen a few times. Could it be the same guy? His suspicions grew, and Rashid decided to take action. 2 days later, on January 11th, Rashid and his son left home under the pretense of going fishing, saying they might stay out all night for a music event. Tasni happily gave her blessing and, as expected, wasted no time calling Ferais over. She didn't want to spend the night alone. But Ferais turned her down. "I promised Sultana I'd watch a movie with her tonight," he explained. Tasni wasn't pleased. She even offered to double the money she usually gave him, but Ferais declined again. Sultana had already promised him a 60-inch TV and a new fridge for his room. That evening, Rashid and his son returned earlier than planned, hoping to catch Tasni red-handed. But when they unlocked the door with their spare key, the house was empty. Confused, they heard shouting coming from the second floor of the complex and rushed to investigate. A crowd had already gathered outside Sultana's apartment. Rashid and his son pushed through, only to discover that Sultana had been attacked. 2 women, Tasni and another resident named Maryam, had ganged up on her. Both were furious that Ferais had chosen to spend the night with Sultana instead of them. The 2 women had beaten Sultana with wooden beams they'd grabbed from under the stairs. Ferais wasn't even home. He'd gone out to grab dinner. By the time he returned, Sultana had been rushed to the hospital, where she later passed away from her injuries at the age of 70. In the aftermath, Ferais claimed he had a genuine relationship with Sultana. "She was kind to me," he said, "and she took care of all my needs. Times are tough, and jobs aren't easy to come by. Competition among online motorcycle drivers is fierce. She helped me survive." Ferais also insisted Sultana was happy with their arrangement, even if it was transactional. She gave him money willingly, he said, and he always tried to make her feel loved. That night, he claimed he was planning a romantic dinner to mend their strained relationship. Sultana had even promised to buy him new electronics the following week. But none of that mattered anymore. A life was lost, and jealousy had taken its toll. Ferais eventually admitted that he had been with over 20 women in the neighborhood. Most of them were just one-night stands, paid, discreet, and drama-free. But 2 women, Mrs. Tasni and Mrs. Maryam, were different. They were persistent, constantly asking him to come over almost every day. The problem? They didn't pay much, so Ferais wasn't interested. On the night of the incident, both women had asked him to come by, but he chose to spend the evening with Grandma Sultana instead. She had the money, and her children were generous to her. In fact, She'd promised him a car once her village land sold for a high price. However, while Fair Eyes was out grabbing food for Sultana, everything spiraled out of control. Both Tasni and Miriam later confessed to the police that they were infatuated with Fair Eyes. They described him as handsome, charming, and, let's just say, very satisfying. But their rage that night wasn't just about rejection. It was about Sultana's behavior. She had been stirring the pot in the neighborhood group chat, bragging about how she had won Fair Eyes' heart and making snide comments about anyone who dared to interfere with their relationship. Earlier that day, Sultana had even escalated things further. She showed up at Tasni and Miriam's doors, threatening to tell their husbands they were unfaithful and trying to steal her boyfriend. To top it off, she threw cat litter at their doors before storming off. That was the final straw. That night, the two women talked it over and discovered they'd both been on the receiving end of Sultana's antics. Fueled by shared anger, they marched up to her second-floor apartment to confront her. Sultana didn't back down. She pelted them with eggs from her refrigerator, pushing the women into a blind rage. Tasni and Miriam stormed back downstairs, searching for anything to use as a weapon. They found a wooden block under the stairs and returned to Sultana's apartment. Fueled by their fury, they beat her brutally. What they didn't realize, or didn't care about, was how frail Sultana's thin body had become. She succumbed to her injuries within an hour. When the case went to court, Sultana's children testified that their mother had recently confided in them about having a new boyfriend, though she kept his identity a secret. They had assumed he was her age and didn't pry. But when they learned it was a young online motorcycle taxi driver, they were furious. They even considered attacking Fair Eyes but ultimately held back. Fair Eyes defended himself, saying that Sultana gave him money and gifts willingly. "Our relationship was consensual," he insisted. "I never forced her to do anything." The courtroom drama intensified as the lawyer defending Tasni and Miriam argued for their acquittal, claiming they acted in self-defense after Sultana had thrown eggs at them. The prosecutor, however, dismissed this as absurd. No matter how hard you throw eggs, it doesn't warrant a violent, deadly attack, they argued. On August 18, 2022, the Dhaka City High Court delivered its verdict. Both Tasni and Miriam were found guilty of second-degree assault resulting in death and were sentenced to 12 years in prison. Fair Eyes received a 5-month sentence for exploiting Sultana, manipulating her into giving him money, property, and her trust. What lessons can we learn from this story?